This story isn't about revenge, and it's not about watching someone fall. It starts with something much quieter and much more familiar. A message in a family group chat. One sentence that cuts deeper than any argument. Don't come to the weekend barbecue. Not because of work, not because of space, but because someone decided your presence was a problem. And the people who should have had your back, they reacted with likes. Most of us know that feeling. When rejection doesn't come from strangers, but from the table you grew up sitting at. When you don't explode or explain, you just swallow it and reply with a calm, understood, while something inside you finally goes still. That moment when you realize you've been trying too hard to belong somewhere that already decided you don't. This story is about that silence. About what happens after you stop begging to be included. And about the morning after when the people who pushed you away step into a world they never bothered to see, and discover exactly who they were laughing at all along. My name is Blaze Carver, and I'm going to tell you what really happened from that message, to the moment the truth hit her so hard she couldn't keep the mask on. But before I share my story, I want to know you're here with me and listening. Just say listening in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. I love hearing how far my story can reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a hard story feel heard. And if you can hit subscribe, not because I'm chasing numbers, but because this is one of those stories that's easier to survive when you know you're not alone, and I don't want to tell the rest of it into silence. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. The office was quiet in the way only a high floor can be quiet. No ringing phones, no chatter bleeding through glass walls, just the low, steady hum of servers and the occasional sigh of the HVAC pushing cool air across polished stone. Outside my window, Research Triangle Park lay under a heavy North Carolina night, humid dark, the kind of darkness that doesn't feel empty so much as it feels loaded. The city lights down toward Durham flickered like distant embers, and the rain that had threatened all afternoon finally started to fall in thin sheets that turned the world into blurred watercolor. I liked working late for that reason. The building belonged to the people who stayed after hours. The noise left. The politics left. The only thing that remained was the work. On my desk sat a stack of documents thick enough to make a dull thud when you dropped them. They were stamped, tabbed, highlighted, and re-highlighted. The kind of paper that looked ordinary until you understood what it carried. Somewhere inside those pages was the future of Helixara Biorobotics, an expansion of our prosthetic limb program into a partnership big enough to pull the company into every boardroom conversation for the next decade. It wasn't just a collaboration, it was a strategic agreement with money behind it, patents behind it, and a timeline that would grind anyone soft into dust. If it went well, it would change everything. If it went wrong, it would still change everything, just in a different direction. I'd read every line twice. I'd run each clause through my head like a stress test. Liability, deliverables, milestones, data rights, manufacturing, compliance. I'd ask the kind of questions that make lawyers glance at you like you're annoying until they realize you're not annoying, you're dangerous. The whole time my name sat on the last page like a loaded gun. Blaze Carver, Executive Vice President of Engineering. I managed hundreds of engineers. I controlled budgets that could build entire wings of hospitals. I could approve something that would make a quarterly call sound like a victory lap, or I could hold the line until the room got uncomfortable and the deal tightened up the way it was supposed to. Most days I didn't even feel the weight of it. It was just a job, a hard one, a relentless one, but still a job. That night I felt it, because right as I uncapped my pen and leaned forward, my phone buzzed against the glass desk. The sound was small, just a single vibration, but it cut through the stillness like a blade. I glanced down, expecting something from my assistant about Monday's schedule or a text from a vendor who'd missed their deadline again. Instead, it was the family group chat. The little green bubble at the top of my screen had Carver Family written across it like a joke the universe refused to stop telling. I tapped. The message was from Jude. "Don't come to the weekend BBQ. My new wife says you'll make the whole party stink." For a second I stared so hard I didn't blink. My mind did that thing it does when it's trying to protect you, when it wants to pretend it didn't see what it saw. Like if you look away fast enough, the words will rearrange themselves into something normal. Something forgivable. Something that doesn't hurt. but the words didn't move. And then my mother reacted. Not with confusion, not with Jude. What the hell is wrong with you? Not with that's not funny. She spammed the message with likes like she was applauding a comedian on stage. A second later, one of my aunts tossed in a laughing reaction, and then my father added a heart like he was blessing it. A heart. Like the insult was love. I waited. I actually waited for the moment when someone would step in and say, "Knock it off, that's your brother." I waited for one single line of defense, 1 ounce of normal human decency. Nothing came. The screen sat there glowing in my hand, and I felt something in my chest go tight, not the dramatic kind of tight you see in movies where a person clutches at their shirt and falls apart. This was quieter. This was like a pressure valve sealing shut. Like the air had been sucked out of a room and you didn't realize until you tried to breathe. It wasn't the insult by itself. It was the history behind it. It was the fact that Jude could write that sentence and feel safe. That he could post it in front of our parents and watch them cheer. That he didn't even have to soften it with a LOL because he already knew how the house worked. Jude was the son in that family, and I was the furniture. Useful when needed, ignored when not, and when someone wanted entertainment, you could always kick the furniture. I didn't cry. I didn't type a paragraph. I didn't ask why. I didn't even say "you hurt me," which is what some softer version of me would have said 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I just held the phone long enough to feel the heat of the screen against my palm, and then I typed 2 words. Understood. That was it. No punctuation, no emotion, no plea. I set the phone face down on the desk like it was something dirty, and I looked back at the documents in front of me like nothing had happened. I signed where I needed to sign, the pen moving clean and steady across paper, my name forming the same way it always did, controlled, legible, unshaking. I didn't do it to prove anything. I did it because the deal had to be done. Because my work didn't get to pause just because my family had decided to use me as a punchline again. But inside, something had shifted, clear as a click. What that text did wasn't just sting. It did something worse. It shoved me out of a place I should have belonged. It told me I didn't have a seat at the table, not even at the cheap folding table in a suburban backyard, where they served hot dogs and pretended we were a normal family for 3 hours. And the humiliation wasn't only that they didn't respect me, it was that they enjoyed showing me they didn't respect me. They liked it. They liked the little power rush of pushing me around in public like my feelings were part of the entertainment. And the most bitter part, the barbecue, was at Jude's house this year. At least that's what he called it. My place he'd been telling relatives for weeks, my backyard, my grill, my rules. I glanced at the calendar open on my computer screen Sunday afternoon, the address listed under the event. And for a moment my eyes snagged on something that didn't belong in a family calendar at all. A line item that lived in a totally different part of my life. A recurring reminder I kept for myself tucked into my financial folder, the one I reviewed like clockwork because it was how I stayed in control: property tax due dates, insurance renewals, maintenance reserves. That address was in those reminders too. The same street, the same house number, 3 years of payments, 3 years of quiet upkeep, 3 years of a responsibility I'd carried without letting anyone see the strain of it. And Jude was uninviting me from the backyard I'd been paying for. My family had never understood what I did. They still thought engineering meant I fixed machines in a basement, that I wore a white coat and cleaned beakers. Jude used to call me lab rat like it was clever. Paige, his new wife, had picked up on it immediately. I'd met her a handful of times, and every time she spoke to me, she did it like she was talking to someone beneath her. She'd made a whole personality out of being shiny and loud and unbothered, the kind of woman who could turn any room into a stage just by walking into it. The first time she looked at my hands, she wrinkled her nose like she'd smelled something bad and said, "So, do you ever get that chemical smell out?" while everyone chuckled like she'd just done stand-up. That was Paige. She didn't just insult you. She made sure the insult landed in front of an audience. And now she'd decided I didn't get to be at the barbecue because I'd make the whole party stink. My mother had liked the message like she was proud. My father had added a heart like the humiliation was affectionate. I could have told them the truth right then. I could have typed funny you say that considering I pay the taxes on that place. I could have cracked the whole illusion with one sentence. But I didn't. I didn't correct them. I didn't defend myself. Not because I didn't have the ammunition, but because I'd spent most of my life believing something that sounds pathetic when you say it out loud, that if I stayed small enough, if I stayed humble enough, they might love me for me. If they knew I had money, they would love my wallet, not my soul. So I let them think I was a nobody. I let them build their jokes on that foundation. I let them laugh because I told myself it was better than being used. That night after I signed the final page, I capped my pen and slid the documents into the outgoing tray. My hand didn't shake. My face didn't change. The only visible thing I did was reach down, open the top drawer of my desk, and place my phone inside it. Then I turned the key and locked it. A simple movement, a small sound. Metal on metal. The kind of click you barely notice unless you're listening for it. I sat back in my chair and looked out over the wet, glimmering sprawl of the triangle. Durham and Raleigh and the dark patches of trees in between. The world outside was damp and heavy. My office smelled faintly of coffee and paper and cold air. In the glass, my reflection stared back a man in a crisp shirt with his sleeves rolled to the forearms, jaw-tight eyes, too calm. 32 years old and somehow still that kid who used to stand in the kitchen holding a ribbon or a report card and waiting for a good job that never came. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet. I wasn't sitting there plotting revenge like some cartoon villain. But I did know one thing with absolute clarity, the kind that settles into your bones and changes your posture. If they wanted me gone from the party, they were about to learn what it meant to be gone from everything else, too. Outside, the rain thickened, tapping at the window like impatient fingers. The night in Durham was humid and dark, but my mind felt bright and cold, as if some internal lock had finally slid into place and refused to open again. I didn't wake up one day and decide my family was cruel. Cruelty like theirs doesn't announce itself with a single dramatic moment. It builds the way salt builds on metal, quiet, steady, and visible, until one day something important breaks and everyone acts shocked. When I think about where it started, I always end up back at the coast. A little town in North Carolina, where the air smelled like sun-warmed pavement and brackish water, where the summers were loud and sticky and everyone knew everyone's business. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. My parents lived in that tight space where appearances mattered because money didn't. They believed respect came from looking like you had things handled, from being the kind of family people nodded at in the grocery store, from having a son who could charm a room. That son was Jude. He was 2.5 years younger than me and somehow made it look effortless to be loved. He was the kid who could trip someone in the yard and then grin so wide the adult would laugh instead of scold. He was loud. He was fearless. He was all elbows and confidence, always running, always talking, always performing. By middle school, he was a highlight reel. Football, basketball, whatever sport had a crowd. He knew how to find the cameras before cameras were even in everyone's pockets. And me, I was the quiet one, the weird one. The kid who preferred sitting on the porch with a screwdriver and a broken radio, taking it apart piece by piece just to see how it worked. I liked the inside of things. I liked systems. I liked the truth that lived under the noise. I could spend an hour staring at a circuit board and feel more peace than I felt at a family dinner. In the Carver house, loud was good. Athletic was better. Smart was suspicious. Smart made my mother uncomfortable because it couldn't be displayed in a photograph the way a trophy could. Smart made my father impatient because it required listening. Jude got praised for being a natural leader. I got told to stop overthinking. Jude got excused because boys will be boys. I got corrected because don't make it weird. There's a pattern that becomes obvious when you're old enough to name it. Jude could fail and still be adored. I could succeed and still be inconvenient. I remember one Friday night when I was 15 and Jude was 13. My parents had gone to a neighborhood cookout, ironically enough, and left us home. Jude decided it would be fun to take my dad's car keys from the bowl by the door and just move the car to impress some friends who were walking by. He didn't get far. He backed into the mailbox so hard it snapped clean off and the fender dented like someone had punched it with a giant fist. When my parents came home, Jude was on the driveway with his hands in his hair, doing this dramatic shaking voice apology that sounded like it belonged in a school play. "I messed up," he kept saying. "I know I messed up. Please don't hate me." My mother wrapped him in a hug like he'd been wounded in battle. My father sighed and said, "At least you're owning it, buddy." No one asked the follow-up question. No one asked how we were going to pay for the repairs. No one asked why the keys were so easy to take. They just looked at Jude's tears like they were proof of character. 2 days later, I was in the garage with a borrowed toolkit watching videos on an old laptop trying to pull the dent out as clean as I could. I'd called a friend's dad who knew bodywork. I'd offered to mow lawns to cover the cost of a new mailbox. I didn't do it because I wanted Jude punished. I did it because someone had to fix it. That's what I was in that house to fix. When the car looked passable again, my father clapped Jude on the shoulder and told a neighbor he learned his lesson. Kid's got a good heart. Jude stood there nodding like a hero. No one mentioned the hours I spent in the garage. No one mentioned the lawns I mowed. The credit went to Jude for being sorry. The labor disappeared into the background where I lived. And that was just one example. There were dozens. Little debts Jude made that got quietly paid. Little messes Jude created that got quietly cleaned. Every time I did it, a part of me thought, maybe this time they'll notice. Maybe this time they'll see I'm not just useful, I'm worth something. They never did. The clearest memory I have is from junior year of high school. I'd entered a state science competition with a project that was basically my whole heart on a poster board prototype sensors, a crude little controller I'd soldered by hand, pages of notes I'd written until my wrist cramped. I won. Not a participation ribbon. I won. I came home with a blue ribbon and that buzzing, almost weightless feeling of being proud of yourself without needing permission. I walked into the kitchen and my mom was boiling pasta, Jude's favorite. Jude had twisted his ankle at practice, and the injury had turned him into a celebrity in our house. My mother kept asking if he needed ice, if he needed pillows, if he needed company. I stood there holding the ribbon like it was a passport into being seen. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I won." She glanced over her shoulder for half a second, eyes flicking across the ribbon like it was a receipt. "That's nice, Blaze," she said. "Don't put it on the fridge, though. I don't want the magnets scratching the finish." Then she turned back to the pot and said, "Can you run to the store? Jude needs more ice." I remember my face burning. Not because I needed a parade. I just wanted one moment of recognition. One sentence that said, "I see you. I'm proud of you. You matter." Instead, I got instructions. An errand. A reminder that the kitchen was a stage and I was just the crew. That feeling, the feeling of being background noise, followed me into adulthood. It didn't go away when I got into college. It didn't go away when I earned scholarships. It didn't go away when I landed internships that made my classmates' jaws drop. My parents didn't hate me. That's the thing that makes it so hard to explain. They weren't monsters. They were just selective with their love. They loved what made them look good. Jude made them look good. I made them uncomfortable. Too quiet. Too intense. Too different. So I learned early to stop expecting anything. I learned to hold my wins close to my chest so I wouldn't feel stupid when no one clapped. I learned to become my own witness. I went to college on a mix of scholarships and sheer stubbornness. I worked nights in labs, not glamorous ones, real ones where you cleaned, calibrated, recorded, repeated. I took internships that didn't sound impressive until you understood what they meant. I moved to bigger cities, then back to North Carolina when the triangle started booming and Helixera began to grow. I didn't climb by luck. I climbed by being the guy who solved problems without needing applause. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being the quiet kid who likes machines and became an engineer people listen to, then a manager, then a director, then someone who sat in rooms with investors and regulators and made decisions that affected real lives. The higher I climbed, the more I realized something: respect exists out in the world. It's real. You can earn it. You can build a life where people see you clearly. But at home, I was still the weird kid with the screwdriver. My parents never asked what I actually did. Not once. They didn't ask what it meant that I worked at Helixera. They didn't ask what my title was. They didn't ask why my schedule was brutal or why my job required me to fly out for conferences and meet with partners. They only asked me if I could fix their router, if I could look at their printer, if I could just take a quick look at a weird charge on their bank statement. And I let them. Because part of me still hoped. Part of me still believed that if I stayed helpful, if I stayed humble, if I didn't make them feel small, they would eventually turn around and say, "You know what, Blaze? You're good. You're enough." That's why I kept my money quiet. That's why I kept my role quiet. Not because I wanted to be mysterious. Because I didn't trust them. Because I knew deep down that if they ever saw me as a resource, they would stop seeing me as a person entirely. Then Paige Lark showed up. Jude met her, and it was like watching someone light a match near gasoline. She was flashy in a way that screamed practiced. The kind of woman who used her voice like a weapon sweet when she wanted something sharp, when she wanted to cut you down. She wore bright colors, loud jewelry, expensive-looking things that somehow always had a faint wrongness to them, like the label was close but not quite right. She was obsessed with image, with the idea of levels, with being seen. The first time she met me was at a holiday dinner. Jude had brought her in like a trophy, his hand on the small of her back, his chest puffed like he'd finally won something. Paige smiled at my mother, complimented the table settings, laughed too loudly at my father's jokes. Then she turned to me and looked me up and down like she was evaluating a used car. "So you work in a lab," she said, voice pitched just high enough to make people listen. "Is it like chemicals? Does that smell ever really wash off? I'm just curious." The table went quiet for half a beat, the way it does when everyone senses an insult but doesn't want to be the one to call it out. I opened my mouth to correct her gently. "It's not that kind of lab," but Jude snorted like she'd nailed a punchline. "Blay is basically a robot," Jude said, grinning. "He doesn't even know how to have fun." My mother laughed. My father chuckled and patted my arm like I was a kid who needed encouragement. "It's honest work," he said. "Nothing wrong with being technical." Technical? Like I was a guy who fixed air conditioners. I smiled, the kind of smile you learn when you've been in rooms where you can't afford to show your real face. I sipped my water and let it go because that's what I always did. I swallowed the humiliation and told myself it wasn't worth the fight. I told myself they didn't know. I told myself ignorance was different from malice. But Paige wasn't ignorant. Paige was intentional. In the months after the wedding, the comments got sharper. She'd talk about ambition with this fake motivational tone, then glance at me and say something about how some people settle. She'd make jokes about my apartment being sterile. She'd call me Mr. Spreadsheet like it was cute. Every time she did it, Jude would laugh first, like proving he was on her side mattered more than proving he had a spine. And my parents would watch it happen and do nothing. Sometimes they'd even join in because joining in was easier than admitting something ugly was taking root. So when Jude texted that I'd make the whole party stink, it didn't come out of nowhere. It was the purest, simplest version of what they'd been saying for years: "You don't belong. You're embarrassing. You're not like us. We'd rather you stay out of sight." And the detail that made it cut deeper than anything else was the location. The barbecue wasn't at my parents' place. It wasn't at some park pavilion. It was at Jude's house, the one he bragged about like he'd earned it. The one tied to my financial reminders. The one I'd quietly kept afloat. That's the thing about being the family utility player. They don't just take your labor. They take your silence, too. They take the way you cover for them, and they turn it into their identity. Jude didn't just live in that house. Jude built a whole narrative that the house was proof he was thriving. That he'd made it. That he was the kind of man who could host a big family barbecue with music and beer and confidence. And I let him. Because he was my brother. Because I still had that old weakness where I believed love meant sacrificing without being asked. Because I wanted stupidly for Jude to become the version of himself my parents had always promised he was. But when I saw my mother's likes under that message, and my father's heart, I finally understood something I'd spent my whole life avoiding. They didn't want me to be seen. They wanted me to be useful. And when I asked even silently to be respected, they treated it like a joke. Sitting in my office the night before after I locked my phone away, I felt a sadness that surprised me by how clean it was. No messy sobbing, no panic. Just a quiet grief like a curtain closing. A part of me still wanted them to look at me and say we were wrong. You mattered. You always did. But that text message was the moment I realized they weren't wrong by accident. They were wrong on purpose, and they were proud of it. The next morning I still drove to work early. Same route, same coffee, same badge swipe at the security gate. The building didn't care what my family thought of me. My team didn't care. The work didn't care. It was the one place in my life where the rules made sense. And as I rode the elevator up to my floor, I had this strange, steady feeling like my body already knew what my mind hadn't caught up to yet. That day, my brother and his new wife were going to walk into a place they'd never bothered to imagine I belonged. And for the first time, I wasn't going to explain myself to make them comfortable. Saturday mornings at Helixera were my favorite because the building belonged to me in a way it never could, Monday through Friday. The parking deck was mostly empty, the lobby lights were dimmed down to that soft corporate glow, and the usual background noise of people trying to prove they mattered had evaporated. No forced smiles. No hallway negotiations. No calendar pings every 8 minutes. Just quiet, clean control. I could hear my own footsteps on the carpet as I walked the long corridor toward my office. And for a few minutes, it almost felt like the world was simple. Badge in, door open, work, results, repeat. I set my coffee down and pulled the final design package up on my monitor, the one I'd been combing through all week for a demo we'd run for a defense medical partner, a hybrid audience that asked brutal questions and expected you to answer without blinking. The demo wasn't just a tech showcase. It was the hinge on a long-term contract that could lock in funding for years, the kind of deal that turned prototypes into production and made the board stop asking what you did all day. The design on my screen was elegant in the way the best engineering is clean, purposeful, almost quiet. A myoelectric interface that didn't just read muscle signals but learned them. A control algorithm that adapted in real time. A limb that could become part of someone's life instead of a reminder of what they'd lost. I'd been staring at that work for so long it lived behind my eyes, but it still made my chest tighten in a way my family never understood. This mattered. It wasn't lab stuff. It was people walking again. People holding their kids. People getting pieces of themselves back. I was in the middle of highlighting a tolerance spec when the intercom on my desk beeped. It startled me because the building was supposed to be asleep. On Saturdays, reception was usually a security guard and a sign-in sheet. The only reason my assistant Mina was even there was because I'd asked her to come in for a couple hours to help with files. I tapped the button. Yeah. Mina. Her voice came through tight, like she was trying to keep it professional while something inside her was flaring. Mr. Carver, I'm sorry to bother you. There are 2 people at the lobby desk insisting they need to see whoever handles the money. They said it's urgent. They're calling themselves family. For a second, I just sat there staring at the screen like the words hadn't landed. Jude had never come to my work. Jude barely acknowledged my work. He called it your lab the way someone calls a high school job, that little gig, like it wasn't real life. He didn't know which building I was in, which floor, what I actually did. He hadn't cared enough to learn. Who are they? I asked, already knowing the answer. Mina hesitated like she hated being the person who confirmed it. Jude Carver and his wife. Paige. The name hit me like a match flicked into dry grass. I didn't feel panic. I felt focus. A crisp, fast-clearing focus, the kind that shows up when your brain recognizes a threat pattern. Send them up, I said. Mina paused. Sir. Security can remove them. Paige is loud, and she's filming on her phone. I kept my voice even. Send them up. And Mina started a note. Time names what they say everything. Loop security in quietly. I want the hallway camera saved. Understood, she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice that I'd taken control. I stood up and smoothed my shirt the way I always did before stepping into a difficult meeting. Not because I was nervous, because details mattered. Optics mattered. I walked over to the cabinet and poured sparkling water into a glass, then set it on my desk like I was expecting a vendor. I didn't rush, I didn't fidget. I took a breath and looked around my office the way someone surveys a battlefield. The leather chairs, the framed patents, the award from a medical nonprofit we'd partnered with, the glass wall that turned the whole city into a backdrop. I thought about that message from the night before, "Don't come to the weekend BBQ. You'll make the whole party stink," and the way my parents had liked it like it was cute. I thought about how Jude had pressed send without fear, and I realized why they were here. It wasn't because they missed me. It wasn't because they wanted to make it right. It was because Paige had smelled something. Paige always smelled something. She'd looked at my quiet life and decided it didn't match the story she wanted to tell about me. People like her didn't believe in quiet success. They believed in status signals. If you didn't flash it, they assumed it didn't exist. So she'd mocked me. She'd tried to put me back into the small box that made her comfortable. But now she was at my building demanding money like she was owed it. The elevator dinged at the end of the hall. I watched through the glass as they stepped out. Paige came first like always, bright heels that clicked too sharply against corporate carpet, a fitted dress that belonged at brunch, not a research campus, sunglasses pushed up on her head hair too styled for 9 a.m. on a Saturday, a designer bag that was close enough to the real thing to fool someone who didn't pay attention, but the stitching was just off if you knew what you were looking at. Jude followed behind her in jeans and a polo shoulders, rounded eyes darting like he'd walked into a museum where he wasn't allowed to touch anything. He looked around at the quiet, the clean, the expensive nothingness that screamed money without ever saying the word. Paige leaned toward him and said something, and even through the glass I could see Jude flinch the way he always did when she snapped. They walked down the hall, reading nameplates like tourists. Paige pointed at a door that said CFO and laughed like it was funny that adults had titles. Then she tilted her head, scanning for something she could use. When they got to the double glass doors outside my office, Paige stopped so abruptly Jude almost ran into her. Her eyes locked on the metal lettering mounted beside the door. Executive Vice President of Engineering, Blaze Carver. She read it once. Then again slower, like the words might rearrange into something that made sense. Her mouth opened slightly. Jude stepped up beside her, saw the same sign, and went pale in a way I'd never seen. He didn't look angry. He looked robbed. Like someone had stolen a story from him. Like the world had cheated by making me real. I pressed the button under my desk. The doors slid open with a soft, controlled whoosh. "Come in," I said. I didn't stand. I didn't smile. I stayed seated in my chair with my hands folded on the desk the way I did when I was about to negotiate with someone who thought they could bully their way into terms. Paige walked in like she was entering a courtroom. Her heels slowed. Her eyes flicked over my office, the view, the furniture, the awards, the calm. Her face twisted between rage and shock the way it does when someone realizes they misjudged the room and now they have to pretend they didn't. What is this?" she demanded, but her voice had lost that playful edge she used at family dinners. "This is my office," I said simply. Jude stared at me like I'd become a stranger overnight. "Liv," he started, then caught himself because I wasn't Liv. I wasn't his sister. I was his brother. And in that moment, the old dynamic cracked. "Blaze," he corrected, swallowing. You work here. Like in this room." I let the silence stretch just long enough to make him feel it. "You wanted to see someone who handles money," I said. "You found him." Paige recovered faster than Jude because Paige always recovered fast. She straightened her posture, pasted on a glossy smile, and walked right up to my desk like she owned the space. She dropped a folder onto my paperwork with a little flourish, the way someone tosses down a trump card. The cover was shiny, professionally printed, full of bright lifestyle photos that looked more like a mood board than a business plan. "This is even better," she said brightly. "We don't have to deal with strangers. Family helps family, right?" I glanced at the title, Lark Plus Jude Lifestyle Brand Launch. The words "Seed Round" were printed beneath it like a costume. "What is this?" I asked. Paige leaned forward, palms on my desk, and I had to fight the urge to tell her to move her hands off my things. "It's our future," she said. "I'm launching a lifestyle brand. Influencer stuff. Fitness, skincare, clothing. Content strategy. Consulting. We need seed money. You can write the check today." Jude stood behind her like a kid caught shoplifting, staring at the floor. "How much?" I asked. Paige said it like she was ordering a side dish. $2 million to start. The number sat between us like a challenge. $2 million wasn't help with a deposit. It wasn't spot us for rent. $2 million was entitlement. $2 million was a person revealing exactly who they thought you were in their life. Paige flicked her eyes around the room again, soaking in the view, and her smile sharpened. "And before you make it weird," she added, "we'll give you 5%. You'll make it back in a year. Easy." I looked at Jude. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Yesterday he'd told me not to come to the barbecue because I stink. Today he stood in my office while his wife asked me for $2 million like it was normal. "Yesterday," I said quietly. Jude's head snapped up. Paige's smile didn't move. "Yesterday you told the whole family I shouldn't come to the barbecue because I'd make the party stink." Paige waved a hand dismissively. "Oh my God, that was a joke. You're so sensitive. We're talking business now." Business. The words sounded obscene coming from her mouth. I kept my tone flat. "If I make the whole party stink, why do you need me today?" Paige's eyes flashed annoyance, then calculation. "Because your family," she said like it was a weapon. "And because you have more than enough. Look around. You sit up here while Jude is drowning. And what you're going to let your own brother fail?" Jude finally found his voice small and desperate. "Blaze, just listen." Paige worked hard on it. I held my gaze on him. Did she work as hard on it as she did on that text message? Jude flinched. Paige's smile fell clean off her face. The mask slipped, and what showed underneath was the person I'd felt at every dinner table, a person who didn't just want money, but wanted dominance. "Don't do that," she snapped. "Don't embarrass us. We came here respectfully. We're giving you an opportunity. Opportunity. That's what parasites called the bite." I reached for the folder, not to open it, but to slide it back toward her like it was contaminated. I set my pen down beside it with deliberate care. "I'm not signing anything I haven't read," I said. "Not today. Not in this room. Not under pressure." Paige's jaw clenched. "You're really going to do this," she said. "You're going to act like we're strangers." I leaned back slightly, still calm. "You've treated me like a stranger for years. I'm just matching the terms." Jude's face went tight with panic. Paige's eyes narrowed to slits. And then she leaned in closer, voice dropping low like she wanted it to feel private, intimate, threatening. "You're going to regret this," she said. "You don't get to turn your back on family and walk away." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at her long enough that she felt the difference between me now and the version she'd mocked at holiday dinners. "We'll see," I said. Paige stared at me for a beat like she wanted me to flinch. When I didn't, she snatched the folder back, spun on her heel, and barked at Jude to follow. He hesitated one last flicker of shame, then he moved after her like a man being led by a leash. The doors closed behind them, the hallway swallowed their footsteps, and the building returned to its quiet. Mina called my intercom a minute later, voice shaky. "They're gone," she said. "Do you want me to document everything I told her? Timestamps, security log, save the hallway video?" And Mina, "Yes. If they come back, I want to know immediately." I hung up and stared at the spot on my desk where Paige's hands had been. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. What I felt wasn't fear. It was clarity. Because now I knew in a way that couldn't be undone that the text message wasn't just cruelty. It was strategy. They wanted me small so they could take from me without resistance. And if Paige was bold enough to walk into my office and demand $2 million the morning after humiliating me in front of my parents, then whatever came next wasn't going to be polite. I stayed in my chair after they left, not because I was stunned, but because I was already running scenarios. Risk assessment was second nature to me. In engineering, you didn't wait for failure to happen. You looked for the weak points and you reinforced them before the pressure hit. Paige had just shown me a weak point in my life that had nothing to do with my company, and everything to do with the fact that I'd spent too long pretending my family couldn't hurt me financially because I hadn't told them I had anything worth taking. That illusion was gone. If they could find my building and my office, they could find other things. If Paige had walked in with a glossy folder and a number like 2 million, she hadn't come to pitch. She'd come to force a signature. People with real plans didn't need desperation. They needed structure. Paige had desperation and theater. I called Mina back on the intercom. "Bring me whatever they touched," I said, "and email me your notes the moment you finish. Also ask security for the visitor log and the elevator camera clip." Mina didn't ask why. She just said, on it like she understood the unspoken truth, something wasn't right. I opened the folder Paige had dropped on my desk before she'd yanked it back. Not to read her business dreams, she'd taken that, but to study what was left behind a faint smear of her perfume in the air, the memory of how she'd leaned in, the words she'd chosen. "You're going to regret this. You don't get to walk away." That wasn't disappointment. That was a warning from someone who believed she could punish you for saying no. The rest of my Saturday went on as planned. On paper, I reviewed the demo package, signed off on a manufacturing tolerance, sent a note to my lead engineer. But my mind kept circling back to one thing. What exactly had Paige expected me to sign? That question mattered more than the insult. Because insults were free. Paper wasn't. Paper could shackle you. Paper could turn you into a guarantor, a co-signer, a liability. And the way Paige had tried to rush it told me she didn't want my support. She wanted my name. That night, back in my condo overlooking downtown Durham, the rain returned like it had a schedule. I poured a glass of water and tried to force myself to eat something, but my appetite was gone. My phone had been quiet for a couple hours, which felt wrong. When your family's been treating you like an ATM for years, silence usually meant they were planning the next withdrawal. The first message came at 8:12 p.m. from Jude. It wasn't an apology. It was a complaint wrapped in a plea. "Blaze, what was that today? Paige was just trying to help us. You embarrassed her." I read it once and didn't respond. A minute later, my mother texted, "Your brother is upset. Why would you treat him like a stranger?" Then my father chimed in. "Son, Paige is particular. She gets emotional. Just smooth it over. Particular. Emotional. The same words they used every time someone hurt me and they wanted me to pretend it didn't matter." I put the phone down, walked to the window and watched the headlights smear across wet streets far below. That was when the bank alert hit. It wasn't a text. It was an email notification that made my stomach go cold before I even opened it, because the subject line was the kind of thing you didn't get on a normal Saturday night. Fraud alert. New credit inquiry. I opened it. Then I opened my bank app. There it was again in stark, sterile font, the kind of font that didn't care whether you were betrayed or not. "A loan application for $480,000 has been submitted in your name." My mouth went dry. For a second, I just stared at the number like it couldn't be real. 480,000, not 2 million, not a pitch, a loan, a debt. Something that would follow you like a shadow if it went through. I tapped for details. It was a small business loan application submitted online. The co-signer listed was Jude Carver. The primary applicant was me, Blaze Carver. My chest tightened so fast it felt like being punched. Then I saw the address they'd used. Not my condo, not my current residence. They'd used my parents' address, my old home base, the place I hadn't lived in for years but still existed in my paperwork like a ghost. And beneath that, the thing that made my vision blur for a second, my social security number entered correctly. They hadn't guessed. They hadn't made a typo. They had it. Someone in my family had access to it. I stood there in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, and I could feel the line between family drama and felony snapping clean in two. How did they get my SSN? The answer hit immediately, sharp and nauseating. Years ago, when I'd helped my parents refinance and organize their documents, I'd left tax paperwork in a file cabinet in their house because I trusted them not to treat my identity like a tool. That trust felt stupid now. Someone had gone into that cabinet. Someone had pulled my documents. Someone had typed my number into a loan application and pressed submit. And then they'd texted me like I was the problem for not signing a check. I dialed Caleb, my private banker, with fingers that were steady only because my whole body had turned to ice. It rang once, twice. He picked up like he'd been expecting me. Blaze, he said, voice shifting into professional mode immediately. I saw the inquiry hit. Are you okay? No, I said. I didn't authorize anything. There's a loan application in my name. I know, he said. It was flagged because the IP address doesn't match your usual activity and the profile is inconsistent. I haven't pushed it forward. I needed confirmation from you. It's fraud, I said. The word felt heavy leaving my mouth. It's identity theft. Caleb paused, and when he spoke again, his tone was careful. The co-signer listed as Jude Carver. Is that your brother? I closed my eyes. Yes. Another pause, longer this time. Blaze, if we mark this as criminal fraud, the bank is obligated to take steps. We can freeze your credit, lock your reports, and flag the account. We can also file a report. Do you want to escalate? I pictured Jude at 13 crying in the driveway after denting the car, my mother hugging him like he was the victim. I pictured Paige's hands on my desk, her voice telling me I'd regret saying no. I pictured my parents liking the insult in the group chat like it was entertainment. And then I pictured my credit ruined, my name tied to debt I never agreed to, my future compromised because someone wanted to play business on my back. Yes, I said. Reject it. Freeze everything. Put a lock on my credit reports. I want alerts on every inquiry. And Caleb, document everything. I want timestamps, IP address, if you have it, every detail. Understood, he said. And I could hear the shift now. It wasn't a family matter. It was a case file. I hung up and sat down at my kitchen counter staring at my phone like it was evidence, because it was. The next 10 minutes were a flood. Messages slammed into the family group chat like they were coming from people who thought shouting could rewrite reality. Jude. Why did you block it? We were approved. Paige. You're trying to sabotage us because you're jealous. My mother, Blaze, just sign what they need so this can be done. My father, family helps family. Don't take this too far. No one wrote, are you okay? No one wrote, did we mess up? No one wrote, who took your SSN? They were furious. I'd stopped them from taking what wasn't theirs, and they said it like I was the thief. My hands didn't shake. I didn't cry. I did what I always did when something broke. I built a system to contain the damage. I took screenshots of the bank alert. I took screenshots of every message. I saved them to a secure folder on my laptop and labeled it evidence. Because naming something makes it real, and because part of me needed the reminder that I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't being sensitive. I was being robbed. Then I made a second folder and backed it up. Then a third. When you're an engineer, redundancy isn't paranoia. It's survival. Sometime after midnight, when the messages slowed into angry silence, I stared at the ceiling in my dark bedroom and felt something settle in. It wasn't rage. It was a clean, brutal understanding. Paige hadn't come to my office because she respected me. She came because she thought she could use me. Jude hadn't sent that barbecue text because he was joking. He sent it because it made him feel powerful in front of his wife. My parents hadn't liked the insult because it was funny. They liked it because keeping me small kept Jude big. And now they'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Because words heal with time. Fraud doesn't. The next morning, Sunday, I didn't answer a single message. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I made one call. Nadia Shu, my attorney, picked up on the second ring like she always did because the clients who have real problems don't call at convenient times. Blaze, she said. Tell me what happened. I told her everything from the group text to the office visit to the loan application, each fact in order, each timestamp as close as I could get it. When I finished, there was a beat of silence. Then Nadia's voice turned precise. You need 2 tracks, she said. Financial identity fraud and asset protection. We'll handle the bank and the report, and we'll also review any property exposure. Do you own anything they might be tied to? I looked out my window at Durham, waking up under gray skies, and thought of Jude's barbecue address. Thought of my financial reminders. thought of the house he called his. "Yes," I said quietly. "There's a house. Then we move." Nadia said, "Monday morning, bring everything you have. We're going to lock this down." I ended the call and set my phone on the counter. For the first time in my life, I wasn't wondering how to get my family to love me. I was wondering how far they were willing to go when love wasn't enough and money was on the table. And I already knew the answer was going to be ugly. I thought I would sleep on Sunday morning. That was the lie my body told itself when I finally shut the lights off sometime after midnight. In reality, I woke before dawn with my mind already running at full speed like a server that never powered down. The ceiling above my bed was still dark, the city quiet, but inside my head everything was active and sharp. I stopped fighting it and did what I always did when something felt unstable. I started breaking it down. I treated the situation the way I would a system failure. Identify the source of risk, map the attack surface, define the assets under threat. Paige was the origin, as one, not Jude, not my parents. Paige. She was the catalyst and the operator. The attack surface wasn't just me. It was my family structure, their habits, their access to information I'd been careless enough to leave within reach. The assets were clear now, my financial identity and the house in the suburbs that Jude had been calling his own. Once I framed it that way, the panic faded. Panic belonged to people who didn't know what they were dealing with. I knew exactly what this was. I lay there replaying the last 6 months with Paige through a new lens, and the pattern that emerged made my stomach tighten. The questions she asked at dinners hadn't been idle curiosity. She'd never asked me how I liked my job or what I enjoyed about it. She asked where I worked, not what I did. She asked whether I signed things, not what I built. She asked if I knew investors, if I'd ever stood in for a company, if I'd set up entities before. At the time, I'd brushed it off as shallow chatter from someone obsessed with money. Now I saw it for what it was, reconnaissance. She wasn't interested in me as a person. She was mapping the financial ecosystem around me, figuring out where the levers were. My phone lit up on the nightstand before 7. I didn't need to look to know who it was. The voicemail icon blinked like an accusation. I let it go to voicemail and listened after my coffee cooling in my hand. My mother's voice cracked through the speaker, high and shaking. She cried, then sharpened. She said I'd humiliated Jude. She said I needed to call Paige and apologize. She said I was tearing the family apart over nothing. Before I could finish processing that, a text from my father followed. "Please don't make this a criminal thing. We can fix this quietly. Fix this quietly." That was when it landed fully. They knew exactly how serious this was. They just didn't want it documented. They didn't want police reports or case numbers or anything that would stain the image of the family they were so desperate to protect. They understood the danger. They were just willing to sacrifice me to avoid it. I didn't respond. I set the phone down and stared out over Durham as the sky lightened from charcoal to gray. Cars began to move far below life, going on like nothing was wrong. Somewhere between sips of coffee, another message came in, not from family this time. Serena from Helixara's PR team. Her tone was professional, careful. "Blaze, just giving you a heads up. Someone has been posting about you online and tagging the company indirectly. Nothing explosive yet, but we're monitoring." I opened my laptop and saw it for myself. Paige had taken to social media like it was a weapon. Long, emotional posts about a cold, wealthy brother-in-law who used money to control people. About toxic family dynamics. About being shut out and mistreated. She didn't name Helixara outright, but she dropped enough hints to make it obvious. The goal wasn't to win sympathy from strangers. It was to create smoke, to make me nervous, to make my company nervous, to pressure me into backing down. I called Serena and told her to document everything. Screenshots, timestamps, URLs. I told it to flag any external emails referencing my name. That instruction paid off faster than I expected. Within an hour, IT forwarded me an email Paige had sent to a general company inbox posing as a concerned family member. She implied I was unstable, that I was in a legal dispute with my family, that partners should be cautious. It wasn't subtle, it was sloppy, and it was dangerous. I told IT to preserve the email headers and server logs. Evidence mattered. I wasn't going to argue with her in public. I was going to outlast her in private. That evening, just as the light was fading again, my doorbell rang. No delivery notification, no call. I checked the camera and saw only a thick manila envelope sitting on the mat. No postage, no return address. I opened the door and picked it up, and before I even turned it over, I knew who it was from. My father's handwriting was unmistakable. Careful. Old-fashioned. The kind of script that came from years of signing checks and Christmas cards. I carried it inside like it might explode if I handled it wrong and set it on the kitchen table. I didn't open it right away. I stood there for a long moment breathing because I already knew whatever was inside would change the shape of everything. Inside was a note and a stack of papers thick enough to feel heavy in my hands. The note was short and raw in a way my father rarely allowed himself to be. He admitted he'd hired a private investigator months ago. He said something about Paige had never sat right with him. She talked too easily about assets and leverage for someone who never seemed to have any. He said he was afraid of my mother and afraid of Jude, afraid of being the bad guy, so he hadn't shared what he'd found. He told me he didn't know what to do. He told me I was the only one in the family who thought clearly. And then he asked me to handle it. I sat down and went through the file the way I would review a technical report. Page by page. No emotion. Just data. Paige had moved states repeatedly, addresses that barely overlapped, multiple civil judgments for unpaid debts, a bankruptcy, and then the centerpiece, her previous marriage, Colt Merrick. The report laid it out cleanly. Credit cards opened in his name without his consent. Loans taken out with forged signatures, tens of thousands of dollars burned through and left behind. Colt lost his business, lost his home, spent months living out of his truck. Paige walked away and started over somewhere else with a new story. One line in the report made my hands go cold. Paige had recently inquired about life insurance policies for Jude. The timing lined up with the debt section further down the page. Jude's credit cards maxed, personal loans, a car loan in his name for a vehicle Paige drove. Jude wasn't just irresponsible, he was being hollowed out. Paige had drained him dry, and now she was looking for the next source. The loan application in my name wasn't an anomaly. It was the next phase. I didn't sit there debating whether Jude deserved it. That wasn't relevant. This wasn't about punishment. It was about containment. Paige had exhausted Jude's resources and moved on. I was the fresh target. I dialed the number listed for Colt Merrick. It rang several times before a rough, wary voice answered. I introduced myself and said one sentence that mattered. My brother just married Paige and she used my identity to apply for a loan. There was a long silence on the line, the kind that told me he was reliving something he'd buried. When he spoke, his voice was tired. He told me to run. I told him I wasn't running. I told him I wanted to stop her pattern. I offered to fly him to Durham and put him up not as charity but because his lived experience mattered. He agreed after a moment. Not eagerly. Resigned. Like someone who knew this fight had been coming back around eventually. After we hung up, I texted Nadia and asked her to prepare 2 sets of documents. One for law enforcement regarding identity theft. One for terminating occupancy at the house under my LLC. I looked at the calendar and saw the barbecue still marked in bold. Sunday afternoon. Same address. I didn't feel dread. I felt resolve. I would be there, not to eat. Not to explain. To end something. RDU was quiet that morning the way regional airports are before the day fully wakes up. I spotted Colt immediately when he walked out of the gate. He didn't look like someone coming for revenge. He looked like someone who had learned how to carry damage without collapsing. We shook hands, exchanged names like professionals, and drove toward RTP without much small talk. At a diner near campus, I ordered coffee and slid my father's file across the table. Colt read in silence, jaw tightening as he recognized his own life on paper. He confirmed details the report didn't capture. The speed, the charm, the pressure to commit fast. The way Paige used family to apply leverage so she never had to look like the bad guy. When he said she always chose men with families, she could manipulate, everything clicked. My parents weren't bystanders. They were tools. On the drive to the house, my phone buzzed again. Another alert from my credit monitoring service. A new inquiry, this time for a luxury car lease. It had been denied because my credit was locked, but the timing was telling. Paige was scrambling, grabbing at whatever she could before the door slammed shut, evidence stacked higher. I parked in the driveway using the same key I'd used for years. Jude answered the door with irritation already loaded in his voice, telling me I wasn't welcome. I walked past him without raising my voice. Legally, I had every right to be there. Paige entered the room mid-sentence and froze when she saw Colt. The color drained from her face so fast it was almost impressive. She recovered by attacking. Accusations flew. Stalker, abuser, lies layered on top of lies. Colt responded by placing court documents on the table. Dates, judgments, numbers. I told Jude to read them himself. I didn't narrate. I didn't argue. I let the facts sit between them. Jude broke in stages. First denial, then confusion, then the slow realization that his financial life was a minefield. He admitted Paige had pushed papers at him to sign, that she'd asked about loans and insurance, that he hadn't read everything. Fear replaced anger in his eyes. I placed the final set of documents on the table. The deed. The lease. The LLC paperwork. I explained calmly that I'd bought the house 3 years earlier, that I'd paid every tax bill, every insurance premium, every repair, that I'd let him live there rent-free because I believed he would grow up. Paige tried to claim a different landlord. I corrected her. I handed Jude the 30-day termination notice and explained the clause triggered by criminal activity. It wasn't a threat. It was procedure. Paige screamed about rights, about lawsuits, about calling the police. I told her to go ahead. Everything was documented. Cameras were recording. Logs were preserved. If law enforcement showed up, the story would not favor her. I left with Colt before the situation devolved. In the car, I messaged Nadia to proceed with the reports and eviction. As I drove back toward the city, the calendar notification for the barbecue popped up again. I didn't dismiss it. I let it sit there as a reminder. If they wanted that afternoon to be a stage for humiliation, I would make it something else entirely. The days leading up to the barbecue moved faster than my body could keep up with, like time had decided to compress itself just to see what would crack first. I kept going to work, kept my routines intact, showed up to meetings, reviewed specs, signed off on milestones because stability is camouflage. On the surface, nothing about my schedule changed. Underneath my phone became a live wire. Legal media, family, 3 fronts, all active, all noisy, all demanding attention at once. I answered what mattered and documented what didn't. Everything else I let ring. Nadia called me mid-morning on Tuesday with the tone she used when something crossed from preparation into motion. The identity theft report had been formally filed. The bank had submitted logs, IP data, timestamps, and written confirmation that the $480,000 loan application had been blocked due to anomalous behavior. She explained it cleanly without drama. Once a report existed, once there was a number tied to it, there was no such thing as undoing it quietly. If investigators identified a pattern across state lines, prosecutors could step in whether I wanted them to or not. I heard that not as a threat, but as a door closing. Paige no longer had the option of crying it away. There would be no reset button. I thanked Nadia and made a note to myself the way I always did when something irreversible happened. Lock achieved. Paige responded exactly the way someone like her always does when direct pressure fails. She didn't retreat. She reframed. Overnight, her social media shifted into full victim mode. Long posts, carefully chosen words. She painted herself as a woman trapped between 2 brothers, one fragile and one cruel. She accused me of financial control, of manipulation, of using money to dominate Jude and sabotage his marriage. She tagged relatives. She tagged friends of Jude's from high school. She let the comment sections fill with sympathy and outrage before anyone could challenge the story. By the time I saw the messages start to roll in from cousins and distant aunts, "Why are you being so harsh? What did they do to deserve this?" I knew she'd moved first. She'd understood something important. Truth takes time, but lies travel fast. I didn't respond online, not once. I told Serena to archive everything. Screenshots, links, timestamps, edits. IT preserved logs of the impersonation emails and every attempt Paige made to contact partners through indirect channels. I gave a single instruction and repeated it until everyone understood: no public arguments, no explanations, no corrections. We would build a record so complete that if the company ever needed to send a cease and desist or demand takedowns for defamation, the foundation would already be in place. Silence wasn't weakness, it was insulation. Wednesday afternoon, my mother showed up at the lobby of Helixera without warning. I heard about it from security before I saw her. She was crying loudly enough for the receptionist to hear, telling anyone who would listen that I'd thrown my brother out, that I was destroying a young marriage, that I was punishing them all out of spite. I took the elevator down because optics matter whether you like it or not. I didn't bring her upstairs. I met her in the lobby where cameras and witnesses existed. She didn't ask me what Paige had done. She didn't ask me how my identity ended up on a fraudulent loan application. She repeated the same lines like a script: family doesn't do this to family. Jude is your brother, you're making us look bad. When I said calmly and clearly that using my social security number to apply for a loan was not a misunderstanding but a crime, she dismissed it with a wave of her hand. She called me cold. She said I'd changed. She told me if I kept going down this path, I shouldn't expect invitations anymore. Holidays, birthdays, anything. She framed it like leverage. I accepted it where we stood. I told her I would rather lose a family that saw me as a wallet than allow a fraudster to keep using that family as a tool to corner me. I told her I wasn't negotiating my safety or my name. Then I walked away. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't justify myself. I left her standing in the lobby because for the first time in her life an ultimatum didn't land. She wasn't used to that. Thursday night, Nadia sent me an update on the eviction process, and something I already understood but needed confirmed. Legally, I had the right to be on the property because I was the authorized representative of the owning LLC. What I didn't have was the right to be sloppy. Any raised voice, any physical blocking, any action that could be edited into a narrative of intimidation would be used against me. So I planned the barbecue the way I planned deployments: entry, exit, placement of documents, order of presentation, witnesses, copies, redundancy. That was the night Jude finally messaged me directly, not in the group chat, not with bravado. His tone was panicked, fragmented. He said Paige was demanding loyalty, that she was telling him if he didn't stand against me publicly, she'd destroy him. He tried to soften it by saying she was stressed, that the loan was supposed to be a surprise, that everything had gotten out of hand. I read between the lines easily. Jude was trapped and terrified not of losing me, but of losing the fragile equilibrium he'd built around himself. I didn't rush to save him. I just marked the reality. At the barbecue, Jude would try to make me the villain if it bought him a few hours of peace. I spent Friday assembling the folder: deed, LLC operating agreement, eviction notice, police report number, bank confirmation, Gordon Klein's summary of Paige's history, key pages from her previous marriage with Colt, a breakdown of Jude's debt. I printed duplicates because I knew she'd try to grab or tear something. When I finished, the folder sat on my table like a sealed door. I wasn't bringing it to hurt anyone. I was bringing it to end something. I slept that night without dreams. The neighborhood in Cary looked exactly the way it always did when people wanted to pretend everything was fine. Cars lined the street, smoke curled from grills, music thumped softly from backyard speakers, laughter floated over fences. I parked, shut off the engine, and sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel, breathing evenly. I wasn't angry. I wasn't nervous. I was prepared. I adjusted my jacket, picked up the folder from the passenger seat, and stepped out. The sound dipped when I walked into the backyard. Not silence, but a noticeable thinning like air being pulled from a room. Paige saw me first. Her face shifted, fast surprise giving way to fury because she'd counted on my absence. She shouted that Jude had told me not to come, that I was ruining the party. I didn't argue. I said I was there to inspect my property and finalize a matter in front of witnesses. I walked straight to the long table where food had been laid out and placed the folder down with a firm, deliberate motion. Paper met wood. Conversation died. I looked past Paige and met my parents' eyes, then the eyes of relatives who had laughed in the group chat. I told them I would be brief, that if anyone thought I was lying, they were welcome to verify every document through public records. I opened the deed first and explained plainly that I'd purchased the house 3 years earlier so Jude wouldn't lose a place to live, that I'd paid taxes, insurance, repairs, that Jude had never paid rent, that everyone standing there was on property owned by someone they'd just mocked. The reaction was immediate and heavy. Whispering, phones coming out. I followed with the eviction notice and explained the legal basis without emotion. Financial fraud and identity misuse. 30 days. All communication through counsel. I made it clear it wasn't about hate. It was about crime. Then I placed the police report number and bank confirmation on the table and said the sentence that mattered. Someone had used my social security number and my parents' address to apply for a $408,000 loan. Jude was listed as the co-signer. It had been recorded. My mother went pale. Several relatives stopped filming because this was no longer gossip. I opened the PI report next and summarized the pattern without reading it aloud. Credit abuse. Loans in a spouse's name. Flight to a new state. I added that Paige had recently asked about life insurance while Jude was deeply in debt. The shock finally reached the crowd. This wasn't drama. It was danger. Paige lost control then. She turned on Jude, calling him useless, blaming him for failing to give her the life she wanted. The mask shattered in real time. Jude collapsed into himself, unable to hold the image he'd built. I didn't savor it. I told Jude I'd given him 3 years to stand on his own. He'd chosen mockery and silence instead. I reminded him of the message about making the party stink. I told him I was done being his safety net. I left before the chaos settled. At the gate, I heard my father call my name, but I didn't turn around. Consequences always come after the moment when someone thinks they can talk their way out. The aftermath unfolded predictably. The eviction proceeded. The sheriff came. The fraud case advanced. Colt testified. Paige faced charges. Jude's credit collapsed. My parents sold their house to cover losses and downsized. I sold the property and funded a local STEM scholarship. I changed my number. I blocked what needed blocking. I built a quieter life. Family, I learned, is not a place where respect costs money. If you are only valued when you pay, you are not loved. You are being extracted. Walking away hurt. Staying would have cost me everything. When a story like this ends, it doesn't really close. It just gets quieter. And in that quiet, we're left with questions that don't have clean answers. About family, about loyalty, about how much of ourselves we give away before we finally stop. Maybe the hardest part isn't walking away, but accepting that some people only know how to love us when it's convenient. And that choosing distance isn't always cruelty. Sometimes it's the last form of kindness we have left for them and for ourselves. If there's one thing we can hold on to together, it's this: all of us deserve a place where our presence isn't tolerated but welcomed. A place where respect doesn't have a price tag. Life doesn't ask us to harden our hearts, but it does ask us to protect them. And sometimes the most human thing we can do is step back, breathe, and let the truth settle where it needs to settle. If this story touched something in you, and if you feel like sharing, you're welcome to leave a few lines in the comments. Not to explain, not to prove anything, just to be heard. And if you'd like to stay with us listening, sharing, sitting with stories like this, you can subscribe and become part of this small space where we don't rush to judge, we just listen. Thank you for spending this time with me, with us. Take care of yourself. And I hope to see you again right here next time.